Okay, so it's official. We're beginning with the Lightening the Lockdown Load presentation. My name is Dr. Justin Coulson. It is so great to have you joining me so that I can hopefully lighten the load for you and make life just a little bit smoother during what seems to be a never-ending lockdown in Victoria. And of course, news reports, not that I'm trying to make anyone feel worse as we start, but news reports are saying it might even go longer. The government is not happy with the way the numbers are coming down, and they want to end this community transmission for once and for all. And my goodness, it's got to be tough. So we're going to be broadcasting live on Facebook as well as via Zoom, because our Zoom subscription has maxed out in just moments. So we've got a lot of people who are participating on Facebook as well. This is a free webinar so that I can help parents in Victoria. I don't want anything for it. I'm not going to try and sell you anything. At the end, I will tell you where you can get more info, but please know I'm not trying to flog stuff to you. I'm not using this as a special marketing thing or anything like that. We just want to be in touch with you and give you the information that you need to take a little bit of the pressure off, I guess, to lighten the load a little bit, because it's so darn hard sometimes. Now, for those of you who are on Zoom, I'm going to be watching the Zoom chat very closely as I talk, and I'll do my best to interact with you there. For those of you who are on Facebook, I won't be able to be quite so responsive to you, but Evelyn is on Facebook, and she will be responding to you on Facebook and doing all that she can to help you there. And anything that's really important that comes up on Facebook, she's going to message me, and I'm going to be able to respond there and help out. A couple of housekeeping things before we dive into this. First off, for those of you who are on Zoom, you have 3 buttons that allow you to interact with me. The first one is the chat. That's what I'm going to be monitoring. There's also a Q&A. Now, there's a bunch of people who have already jumped into the Q&A and made some comments. And we're going to do the very best we can to respond to your questions. I'll do that at the end of the presentation. So if you've got big questions that require a little bit of I don't know, a little bit more than just a quick acknowledgement, use the Q&A for that. And if you press the raise hand button, I won't answer it at all. Why? Because there's just, the audience is far too big and I won't be able to find you, get to you and bring you in. It's just going to be a little bit challenging to do that. There's also been a request made that we share the Facebook link again. So we will do what we can to help there. And can I just, I guess, highlight one really critical thing, and that is that I don't want anybody in this presentation tonight to feel guilty or shamed or feeling like they're the only one. The fact that we've had more than 10,500 people say, I want to be in this webinar, says that you are not the only one. It is hard and you want the load to be lightened. So my job tonight is to help you feel like there actually is hope and it's okay. And it's supposed to be tough, because nobody really is doing it easy. And if they say they're doing it easy, well, good for them. Let's wave the flag and be happy for them. But most people are indicating that they're having some struggles. I'll give you an idea of what I mean by that. When we have a look at what feedback we've been getting on Facebook, and this doesn't include the conversations I've had with people, this is what people have been saying. And it's interesting drawing the comparison between what's happening now, the lockdown now, versus the lockdown earlier on in the year. You know, take one kind of felt like a bit of a novelty. Everyone was like, oh, we're getting to spend family time together. And people were talking about how they were going to take up new hobbies and they were going to slow the family down and make everyone peaceful and kind and gentle and love being around each other. And a lot of people did that really well. But by the end of it, and it was such a short one compared to what's going on this time, by the end of it, a lot of people were climbing the walls. They were saying, we're over it. Especially people who are in lower socioeconomic circumstances, people who don't have as much space, you know, maybe they're living in a unit. If you're living in an apartment right now or a townhouse and you've got kids that want to get out and about, it's just so hard. This is what one person said. We blocked out names and images just for privacy, even though it was on Facebook. One person said, mentally it's tougher. It feels like the rest of the country is moving on. No idea when it will end, given the high numbers and the nature of transmission. The longer it goes, the more I worry about the adverse impact on kids and the lack of socialization. Remote schooling's ticking along. That part's probably easier this time around. And a lot of people have said that, you know, like schooling, yeah, it's going okay. Sometimes the kids are motivated, sometimes they're not. But the hardest thing is the isolation. And as a guy who's got a PhD in psychology, that's the thing that I'm worried about the most as well. The isolation is hard on our kids. It's not healthy for them. It's not what they're supposed to be experiencing. This was another comment that came through. First time there was hope that things would be able to get back to normal if we all did the right thing. This time though, it's been hard to have any hope, especially as the problem is Victoria's alone. The killer for my kids was their sports seasons being cancelled. Now they talk of if they go back to school rather than when. Very hard for teens in particular. And you'll note that there's this interesting corollary between these two comments. Everyone in Victoria knows that it's just Victoria. Like the rest of the country is kind of moving on. Yes, New South Wales has got up and down transmission and there's concerns there, but New South Wales is still sort of ticking along. And the rest of the states, they seem to be doing okay. There are strict borders in most places, but the states, you know, there's sport happening and there's school happening and life is kind of normal-ish in most states of the country. So it's a really big challenge if you're in Victoria, because you know, it's kind of like Christmas morning when you're watching everyone else open their gifts and you didn't get any. And it's like, well, hang on, this just doesn't feel fair. I want to have a life. And who are these people? It's hard to not be frustrated with the people who are maybe making decisions that aren't necessarily in the best interests of all Australians and all Victorians. Grade 3 spelling words, said this person, this week are F words. I have a few that I want to add to that list. That's how well it's going. 3 at home and it's crap. How do you motivate kids who don't want to work to work? The schools have been fantastic and the work that's been said is really reasonable, yet the kids still think there's too much. And this person said, I think it's about 75% or less of what's done at school. 6 more weeks to go for now. And the countdown continues. And so we keep on seeing this situation where people are starting to just be over it. Last time it felt like a bit of a break from the busy pace of life. All the after school activities and sports stopped and we all just had to slow down. This time it feels like there's no end in sight and that the year has drained everyone. It's just harder mentally and emotionally than last time. And with a son trying to finish year 12, it's a struggle returning to remote learning. We're not as optimistic this time because we know how hard it is to be away from our loved ones. It's really interesting to listen to this grieving process that people are highlighting, this sense that everyone's missing out. And for those of you who have got senior students particularly, it's a hard thing. You know, there goes the end of year 12 formal. School is weak. I don't think that that's really going to be a thing this year. And all of the celebrations and all of the rituals and all of the traditions. But, you know, if you've got a child who just started a new school this year, maybe you've got a child in grade 7, or perhaps you moved house and they're trying to fit into a new community. It's so hard for them to make friends when they don't know anybody at school. They only had a few weeks and then there was isolation and it's like, well, I don't know anyone and how am I supposed to make this happen? Through the chat, there's been a couple of things come through. One person has said, Rebecca said, with a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old, the 7-year-old's now reverting to almost kinder emotional behavior, no matter how much emotional regulation we do. How do I help them understand what he's feeling is normal? It won't last forever. There are tears hourly for no reason. I'm really going well, not losing it, but I'm beginning to hit my limit and I've got no idea where to go. And I get the sense that this is not an unusual thing. Rebecca, I reckon we can answer that question as we go through. Samara has got an interesting perspective though, and I think that this is important. Samara says, we feel safe staying home. We think it's the safest thing to do to keep ourselves safe and others safe. We just got to stick to this until the dark times pass on. Think of the people who have lost their loved ones. But it sure is a challenge, isn't it? A couple of other comments that have come through. Homeschooling, and we're going to call homeschooling remote schooling because that's actually what we're talking about, or learning from home. Homeschooling side of things is much easier because we have a routine and we know what we're doing. But as for the rest of it, it's much harder this time, especially mentally. And then this comment that came through, it's harder this time around, less motivation, higher emotions, less supports with kinder and childcare closed and travel restrictions. We were so depleted from the first isolation and didn't have enough time to fill our buckets before going back into it again. So let's dive into this. With the time that we have, my intention is to spend, like I said, about 40 minutes max talking about this. I want to share 4 things that I think can help every family right now, whether you're living on acreage in rural Victoria and you're dealing with stage 3 restrictions, or whether you're living in an apartment in inner city Melbourne and just doing the best that you can with no space and kids climbing the walls. Okay, so let's dive into this and have a look at what these 4 things are. And I've just been told that I've disappeared. Somebody can't see me anymore. That's okay. Just watch the 4 things. I'm sure that I'll come back. I'm not quite sure how I disappeared or why, but I'm being told that there's nothing on the screen, which seems really, really strange. So let me just click this button here and see if we can work that out. Okay. So the first of the 4 things is that our kids need to be heard. And when I say they need to be heard, what I mean is that if we go back to Rebecca's comment, I've got this child who's reverting to younger behavior, almost like they're back in kindergarten. It's so hard for us to stay calm and level. But when our children become what psychologists call dysregulated, that is, their emotions go out of control a little bit, what often happens with us as parents is that we kind of meet them where they are emotionally. Our emotions go high because their emotions are high. Now, there's a saying that I share with parents all the time. It's not actually completely accurate, but it's very useful. So I'll tell you what the saying is. I'll tell you why it's not accurate and what I really mean by it. And then I'm going to keep using the saying because it's useful. And the saying is this: high emotions, low intelligence. When emotions are high, our intelligence, it kind of just vanishes out the window. It disappears out the door. And you've probably experienced this. You know, when you're getting really emotional and all of a sudden you start saying things and doing things that if you were rational and calm and being intelligent in the moment, you wouldn't do that stuff. You'd be able to come up with ideas. You know, when you're calm, you can think of really great ways to respond to challenges. But when you're in the moment, it's almost like your intelligence says, you don't need me right now, see you later. Or maybe we kick it out the door with our anger and frustration or our feeling of hopelessness and helplessness. But high emotions, low intelligence. Now, we are actually as intelligent now as we were when we were emotional and vice versa. But what's really happening is that our emotional brain kind of floods the rest of our brain, particularly our thinking brain, which is this part here, this prefrontal cortex at the front of our head. That's the part of our brain that does all the thinking and planning and considering consequences. And when we get really emotional, it often gets overridden with all of the neurotransmitters going ping, 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 because we're becoming emotionally flooded. When that happens, we lose access to the cognitive resources that allow us to think clearly, to the psychological resources that help us to recognize what's going on and create a little bit of space for ourselves. We lose touch with the emotional resources that help us to regulate our behavior and stay level and calm. In so doing, sometimes we lose contact with the social resources that we need to lean on somebody and build a relationship when things are tight and tough. Now, that's what happens to us. And so my short way of saying that is high emotions, low intelligence, because we can't access those resources. Our emotional brain is taken over. That means that when our children start to hurt, when our children start to struggle, when our children sit there and they say, I've had enough. I don't want to do my schoolwork. I hate doing this. What we start to do is we start to get triggered. I had a conversation this morning with a guy in New York City. His name is Mark Brackett. And Mark Brackett is the author of this beautiful book called Permission to Feel. It's all about emotional intelligence. Mark Brackett is the director at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, and he's a professor at Yale University. The guy's got some cred. So I was interviewing him for my podcast. You'll be able to hear that in a few weeks on the Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families podcast. And we were talking about this idea of triggering. Jesse has just said, can you show the book again? There is the book again. It's called Permission to Feel, and it's by Mark with a C, Mark Brackett. And we were talking about this idea of being triggered. When our kids have a big emotion, especially when we're already feeling drained, we're trying to juggle the work that we're doing from home because no one's allowed to go to work anymore. So we're working in one room and the kids are supposed to be working at the dining table, but one of them says, she pinched me or she pushed me or he did this, or, you know, they're breathing my air, that kind of thing. And we get triggered because we're on eggshells. You know, we're so hyper aroused. We've got the boss having a teleconference with us right now, or talking to a client, and the kids are going in the background. And we're like, how am I supposed to do this? And Kaz asks the question, how do we stay calm and not match their heightened emotions? And so here's what research tells us, Kaz. When somebody starts an interaction at this level, what usually happens is that we meet them at that level. Now, there's some debate in the scientific literature right now, but there's a general belief. Some people are arguing no, some people are saying yes, but there's a general belief that we have this circuitry in our brain, these brain cells, we call them mirror neurons. And what they effectively do is that they mirror the emotion that the person in front of us is displaying. And so we start just copying that emotion. So what's going on really is that our emotions are becoming contagious. So all that happens for us, which means that we catch their crazy, we catch their cranky, we catch their chaos, and we become cranky, chaotic, and whatever the other word was that I said ourselves. What we really need to do, though, is we need to be there calm. Because if they're up here and we can stay calm, what can actually happen is we can bring them back down. The secret is that we need to stay calm. And that's why I've highlighted that they need to be heard. Because when our children are behaving in challenging ways, it's because they have an unmet need. And you know what we normally do when they have an unmet need and they start to behave in a challenging way? We let go of our intelligence, high emotions, low intelligence. We get triggered. And so we respond with frustration. And we're like, would you stop it? Would you just cut it out? Kim says, I use an analogy of a sinking boat. The child is emotional and is sinking in the boat. And most of the time, rather than the parent throwing them a rope and pulling them to shore, the parent jumps in the boat and sinks with the child. I love that, Kim. I think I might steal that. That's brilliant. What we need to do to throw that rope to the sinking boat, let me just bring that metaphor straight into my conversation here. The way that we do that is that I'll give you a little script. We actually name the emotion that we're seeing. So we might say, you're feeling really frustrated right now, or you're feeling really disappointed. You're feeling really angry. You're feeling really isolated. You're feeling like you've got all of these wiggles and jiggles and you just want to get them out. And so by naming it, Mark Brackett says, you tame it, name it to tame it. You can bring that emotional level down. And let's put this into an adult context for a sec. I want to make it really clear that this doesn't just work with kids, it works with grown-ups as well. Let's say you're in isolation in Victoria. Imagine that. I mean, that's literally what we're talking about, right? You're in isolation in Victoria and your partner, your husband, your wife, your spouse, whoever it is that intimate other in your life. And I guess not everybody has that, but I'm speaking about having that special person in this instance. They walk into the house and they've had a terrible day. They've had an absolutely rotten, lousy, awful, horrible, no good day. And you look at them and say, what's your problem? Or you look at them and say, don't walk in here with that attitude. Don't walk in here with that look on your face. Or maybe you ask them to do something and they roll their eyes and say, you have no idea what kind of a day I've had. And you kind of go, and you get triggered. Because our kids do and say the same sorts of things, and that's how we respond to them. But imagine if, when they walked into the house, you looked at them and saw, just by the look on their face, by their body language, that this is not going well for them right now. And you said to them something like this: it looks like you've had a really rotten day. My guess is that your partner would look at you and go, yeah. And maybe you might look at them and say, do you need a hug or do you just need some space? You see, what you've done is you've heard everything you need to hear just by looking at their body language. And when you engage with your children, when they're having these really big emotional moments, now the reality is sometimes nothing will work. Sometimes they're too emotional. They're intelligent, because I talked about that in your case, but it happens with the kids as well. Sometimes they're so emotional that no matter what you do, you just need to ride out the storm. Ideally with them, you'll sit and hug them if they'll let you, but sometimes they're just so emotional and it's like, I'll give you some time and some space and you can come back and get a hug when you're ready. Sometimes that's all you can do. So please don't think that there's a perfect solution or an answer for everything, because sometimes there's not. Sometimes you just got to get through it, but you can always get through it kindly. And I think that's the critical thing here. But when your child's having this explosion or this frustration or this meltdown or this big tear-jerking moment, I think that if you want to really hear them, what you want to do is you want to look at them and say, this is really hard, isn't it? You're feeling this, aren't you? And if you get it wrong, they'll tell you, no, I'm not. I'm feeling this and this and this instead. And you say, right, okay. You say, would you like a hug or would you like some space? And then as they calm down, because they know that they've been heard, as they calm down, then you simply say something to them like, what can I do to help? Or what do you think we should do now? How can we fix this together? Now, this will work with kids as young as 3 or 4, right up to 53 or 54 and beyond. And it's a really simple script. If you're a note taker, this is the stuff to write down. You name the emotion. You tell them you see how hard it is and offer them a hug. And then you say, what can I do to help? Will this fix every problem? No, of course it won't, but we've only got 40 minutes and I can't tell you every answer that you could possibly try. If you get it wrong, it's okay. We all get it wrong. This guy right here doing all the talking, I make no claims to parenting perfection. I make mistakes all the time with my own kids. I've got 6 of them. They give me plenty of opportunities to get it wrong. But Claire has made a really critical point here. Because some people are saying, well, I've got these stubborn children, or I've just got to let it out. I've got to blow my top. I've got to just let it all go. Sometimes I've just got to yell at them. Sometimes I've got to scream off the back deck, whatever it might be. But Claire has highlighted this, and I think it's critically important. Claire says, I work in customer service. And when we have an angry customer, we kill them with kindness to diffuse it. When we are kind and when our energy is low and when we stay calm, it's extraordinary what happens to the climate of our living room. Will you get it right all the time? No way, impossible. But you can get it right sometimes. So just hear them. And the best way to show that you can hear them is to focus on their emotions. Their behavior is an indication that there's something not right. Their emotions convey information, and that information is important for you to help them solve their own problems. As a parent, don't try to fix everything all the time, because you can't. You just can't. But what you can do is kindly and gently support them, work with them, and be with them. Cara has just said, I've been using this method for a few weeks after hearing you talking about it previously, and it's been an absolute lifesaver. Thank you, Cara. I'm grateful for that. Kim says the worst question to ask is why? 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 And I think so. I think you're right. It's just so much easier to step in and gently say, it's hard, isn't it? You seem to be really struggling with this or with that. Okay. Adam says, my daughter was just came out looking angry because her iPad was on 1%. I said, what's wrong? And what can I do to help? It made her smile. And I think that's the critical question, right? What can I do to help? When your kids realize that you're not the enemy and they know that you're actually here to help, it changes the game. You become their ally. You become their helper. And everyone feels better about life. Now, I could talk about this for a whole lot longer. As you can tell, I really want to keep on talking about just how important it is to hear our children. But maybe I can just say one more thing. And if you were listening in Melbourne today, I was on Triple M. We're talking with Eddie and Sam Darcy about this idea. And I said, to a child, love is spelled T-I-M-E. Just like dollars are the currency of our economy, connection is the currency of our relationships. And we show our connection in our relationship best by just listening, by just being there. So when your kids need you, to the extent that it's possible, and I know it's not always possible, just pause, take a breath, stop what you're doing, look them in the eyes and listen to them. Okay, that's the way we go. Now, somebody anonymously has said, well, what if they're unwilling every morning to start the school tasks for the day? It's like they play on it. We talk and he says, I just don't want to do it. I'm going to give you a great story to help with that in just a couple of minutes. In fact, I'm going to do it now. I have permission from the person who shared this with me to share it widely and publicly. Many, many years ago, when I first started happyfamilies.com.au, a wonderful lady by the name of Victoria got in touch with me and said, it was 2 o'clock in the morning and I was having a really hard time and I found your website. And it's so different to all of the other parenting experts that are out there. And it's given me so much hope. And I've been practicing it and my relationships with my children are better. And Victoria has been following me ever since. This is literally, her name is Victoria and she lives in Victoria. Imagine that, fancy that. And so Victoria messaged me the other day about her children not wanting to do their schoolwork. I'm guessing that that's a few of you. And she shared the following story. Like I said, I got her permission to share this with you because of the way she dealt with it. And I think that it will be helpful. She says, I'm not sure what your view is on how I handled this, but as you know, we're dealing with restrictions in Melbourne and the kids are remote learning again. We find it very difficult. The girls are pretty reluctant and avoidant, and I feel like the schoolwork police. Penelope, who is now 8, has been particularly challenging this time around. She's essentially refused to do her work, and there's been a lot of conflict over it. I've tried asking her what's going on for her, and she just tells me it's boring. We've had long conversations about how sometimes we need to do things that aren't super fun just because they're important. We've talked about why education is important. I've tried to sit with her and help her stay on track. None of it has worked. I've found myself getting frustrated and angry with her, which astonishingly also hasn't helped. She says, on Friday, I decided to step right back. I sat with her, had a cuddle, and listened. Then I said, I've been finding home learning really hard and not very pleasant. And I think you've also been finding that. And she agreed. So you can see how there's a lot of listening going on. But then Victoria did something that I think is just masterful. She said, I want to help you. Remember, this is this recurring theme. I'm hearing your problem and I want to help. How can I help? I want to help you, but I can't help you if you won't let me. And I've decided that I won't keep trying unless you want me to. It's actually up to you whether you do your work or not. Now, remember, we're talking about an 8-year-old here. Victoria says this to her daughter, Penelope: I'm going to let you decide, but I want you to understand what your choices mean. Now, I want to be really clear here before I tell you what Victoria said. Victoria did not make threats. Victoria did not impose sanctions. Victoria simply explained what the consequences of a choice not to do schoolwork might mean in a very real sense. Nothing she was going to do, simply what the natural outcome of a choice to not do schoolwork would be. Have a listen to this. She said, firstly, you won't learn all the things you need to go into grade 4 next year, which means that you might have to do grade 3 again. If you do need to do grade 3 again, that's okay. But I just want you to know that before you decide. Now, this is profoundly important because you can see that she's not actually controlling her daughter. She's saying, you're going to have to do grade 3 again, probably. And that's actually okay. I'm not going to be upset about it. Your choice. I just want you to know that if you don't do grade 3 work now, you don't go to grade 4 with your friends. And it's not because I'm doing it. It's because the school won't let you move up. You won't know the stuff. She says, secondly, you won't have an iPad anymore. And now I know that sounds like a punishment, but let me explain why this is not a punishment. Victoria said, that is not a punishment, but you know that I don't believe children need iPads. And the only reason you have one is because the school says you need it for your learning. If you're not doing your schooling, you don't need the iPad. So you can see this is not a punishment. This is like, well, we bought you the iPad for school learning, but if you're not doing school learning, then we don't have a need for an iPad. Third, when you have your next catch up with your teacher online and your classmates, you won't have done the work and you will need to explain that to them. It's not my job to explain that to them. It's your choice and you need to take responsibility for it. Why don't you take some time to think about it and we can chat more about it if you like. So that's where the story kind of stops for a second. Really careful, considered, gentle, kind, helpful conversation. This is not about sanctions. This is not about a parent raising the white flag and saying, I give up. This is about a parent who says, I care for you and I want good things for you. But if you decide not to do it, I'm not going to fight with you anymore. You just need to know really clearly what the consequences are. And I'm not giving you the consequences. This is just what is going to happen naturally, whether I do something or not. She says she then went into the living room and spoke to her husband and said, and then she used some coarse language that's not in keeping with our community standards. So I'm not going to use that particular word, but she said, we're gone. I can't believe I've just done this. Because when she walked out of the room, Penelope was 100% going to decide that she could live with all of that and she was never going to pick up a pencil again. But here's the great part of this story. 45 minutes or so later, Penelope sidled up to me and I asked her whether there was something that she wanted to talk about. She said, I don't want to do schoolwork on the weekends. I said, I can understand that, but I don't think that's the question you need to answer. That is a question of when you're going to do your work. I think first you need to answer the question of whether you're going to do your work. Do you want to get your schoolwork done? She said she did. So then I suggested we go and make a list of tasks she had to do and we could then work out when she could get them done. And the story goes on from there. But the last thing that I want to highlight is this. She's been pretty motivated since then and we've had no further dramas. When we listen to our kids, when we give them a sense of autonomy, they actually take control of things. It can be very uncomfortable. It can be very difficult. But when they choose for themselves, I think that the answers are inside them. And if we stop giving them something to push against, they'll be okay. So I talk all the time about how force creates resistance. You might have seen that Facebook video of mine that 75 million people have watched, where I talk about how force creates resistance. And in that instant, by listening to her daughter and then having a gentle conversation with her, Victoria has helped her little girl to understand that I'm not going to force you to do this stuff. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be here. I'm going to support you. But you know what, kiddo? You kind of got to live with your choices yourself. Tim says, it's really hard, though, to bank your own stress and not project it onto the kids. I run my own business and the path forward looks challenging and bleak, which is really stressful and difficult for the kids to understand the associated anxiety. And you know what, Tim, you're exactly right. You know, there have been a few nights during COVID where I'm running my own business as well. And I walk upstairs to the dining table and sit down for my evening meal with the family. And I don't want to talk to anyone. And, you know, my head's full of a million concerns and fears and worries and all that kind of stuff. And it's so hard to have the headspace to actually listen to these kids. And yet it's the only thing that we can do for them. Because right now we're kind of it in terms of face-to-face social contact. The family is all they've got. And somehow we've got to find a way to do it. Now, there's another webinar that there's an entire webinar on how we can do that. But I think I've probably spent enough time on that to move us forward. I guess the main emphasis that I want to make here is it's not our job to fix things. It's our job to listen and give them the opportunity to come up with answers for themselves. Okay, so I've spent 30 minutes on the first of 4 things that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to do the next couple really quick because we've only got 10 minutes to move through these. The next one is they need humor. They need to have fun. They need us to just be human and laugh and be silly, which again is really hard when you're in Tim's situation and you're dealing with all the stress of, excuse me, of losing work or worrying about how you're going to put food on the table. It's so hard to be able to do that. But our job as parents is to actually lighten the load for them. And the best way that we can do that is to just have some fun. So, you know, the other night we were at dinner and I looked up at the ceiling, and while I was looking up there, I said, "Hey, kids, look at our ceiling." And they looked up and they're like, what? And I said, "No, just look at it." And they said, "What?" And I said, "Isn't it amazing?" They looked at me like, "Are you okay, Dad?" I said to them, "Well, I mean, I'm not saying it's the best ceiling in the world, but it sure is up there." To which they all groaned and went, "Oh, that's terrible." But I thought it was so funny. I think that's just an absolute ripper. I said to them, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there was a shoe factory that burnt down recently. Something like 10,000 souls were lost. I think that there's a place in the world for the dad joke. I think that we need to find some ways to just find delight in what we're doing. And you know what? Thank you so much for all the groans that are coming through on the chat, by the way. I do appreciate that. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. You don't have to tell the dad jokes, but you can find fun. You know, every now and again, we might look around the dining table and say to everyone, "Are you feeling okay?" And everyone's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." You're like, "Well, could you let your face know, please? Can we find some humor? Can we have a bit of a laugh?" The other day, so my daughter, she's married now, but a few years ago, she went through a messy breakup with the love of her life. And she decided that she wanted to buy a puppy dog to help her to get over it. I was like, we don't need another dog in the house. We've already got one and we love him, but when he dies, we're not replacing him. Dogs can be kind of inconvenient. We're a bit over this. And so I said, "Well, don't you dare buy that dog." And she bought the dog. Now, she's married and moved out and we've still got the dog at home. Surprise, surprise. I've thought so many times of getting rid of it, but I'm just not the dad that can do that. I know some people are fine with it, but I can't do that. Maybe there's that whole thing that I'm a parenting expert and I'm scared that it would get out. I don't know, but we've still got the dog. Anyway, Chanel's dog loves underpants. She finds them, she sneaks into the house, she sneaks into people's rooms, she finds underpants on the ground and she eats them. I mean, she doesn't actually swallow them, but she just tears them apart. She just loves to scratch them and bite them and rip them apart. And the other day, I found another, I'm sure we've gone through about $1,000 worth of underpants over the last couple of years. We're constantly buying new undies because of this rotten dog. Anyway, we found another pair of underpants the other day, and everyone's at the table when Kylie is my wife, Mrs. Happy Families. Kylie has picked up these underwear that the dog has, and she holds them up in front of the daughter who owns and is responsible for this pair of underpants and says, "Ella, the underpants." And Ella looks up and she sees what's happened. She starts laughing and she says, "What, you think I ate them?" And obviously she didn't eat them. But it was such a funny thing. Maybe you had to be in the moment. I don't know. But if we can find the opportunity to laugh and goof off, you know, every night, literally every night, we play this game, Push Dad Off the Bed. That's the game. The kids come into my bedroom just before story time, right before bedtime. And as soon as they see me laying down on the bed, it's pushed out off the bed. And they hurt. They beat me up. They absolutely pile on and give me heaps. But once I'm off the bed, then it's my job to get all the kids off the bed at the same time. And it's getting really hard because I've got all these teenagers and I've got a bunch of little kids who pile onto my back and stop me from getting the big sisters off the bed. And the bed gets completely destroyed every single night and I get in trouble for it. But this is how we have fun. And we need to have more fun and more laughter and more lightness in our lives. It's just healthy for us. And again, it gives us the connection. Now, I could talk about the importance of humor and why we need it for a lot longer. But again, in the interest of time, I want to move on to the third big idea tonight. And that is this. They need to help others. Well-being, feeling good, happens most often when we are not thinking about ourselves and when we are not thinking about how we can feel good ourselves. Now, I know that in an isolation context, it's kind of hard to find ways to help others. And yet, jumping on the phone or jumping on Skype and having a chat with someone who's having a hard time, or donating some books, or making some sort of a contribution to something or someone online, not necessarily monetarily, although maybe monetarily, or maybe making some masks, or maybe finding a way, being creative, looking at your school and saying, what can we do to help? Looking at your neighborhood and saying, who needs a hand? Talking to somebody who could just do with a friend. It's so extraordinary what it does for kids, and kids in particular. They just thrive. They eat it up. There's something extraordinary about helping them to step outside of themselves to do something for other people. Now, I don't have the capacity tonight to talk about all the different ways that we might help others, but I reckon if you jump online and start to have a look around, you'll see opportunities to help everywhere. I have a wonderful friend and colleague. Her name is Rebecca Sparrow. Some of you might have heard of Beck Sparrow. If you don't follow her on Facebook, please do. Beck has so many different ways that she taps into the community and helps people to know how to help people. She's just a helper. And that's what I love about people like Beck, and especially issues like we're facing right now. There are people who are extraordinary helpers. I'm not the best at knowing how to reach out and do the stuff that Beck does, but I'm doing this tonight because I want to help. And it just feels so awesome to help. And our kids lap it up. Kim has said, my daughter Zoom lessons her friends who are struggling with their work. It's been amazing and she loves it. And the bonus out of that is that your daughter learns her work better. Tanya says, my 7-year-old and her bestie write letters to one another, walking the 1 kilometer to each other's house to post it in their letterbox. Isn't that beautiful? I just think that's amazing. Newport Fiddle and Folk Club say we do extended family Zoom parties and we eat chocolate and cupcakes for the birthday family member. Oh, Fiona has pointed out, I forgot all about this. On Facebook, there's a Facebook page. I should have mentioned this, and thank you for the reminder, Fiona. The Kindness Pandemic is full of ideas and positive stories. I was following along there for a while, but I just couldn't keep up with it all. It was flooding my feed and I couldn't get any work done. I was reading all of these great things. And so I think that if we can just sit down with the kids and say, who can we help and how can we help? What can we do for the neighbors? What can we do for one of your friends? What can we do here or there or wherever it might be? That's got to be something that we can dive into and do to help our children with their well-being. It takes the focus off us and our miserable situation. And I guess in some ways, it helps us to recognize that we're probably doing okay compared to a whole lot of other people. And that if we're in a position where we can make a difference, we can change the world one individual at a time, one family at a time, one donation at a time. Sue has said our neighbours' kids put together a chocolate gift pack and delivered them to all the neighbours and the local block just to cheer people up. Isn't that a great idea? You can do the knock and run kind of thing, or you can knock and then stand 3 meters away from the door and say, we just brought you something and you might want to leave it out and sanitize it, but it's all, we've cleaned our hands, we've done the right thing. Jess has said there are loads of ideas on how to connect and entertain kids and each other, but nothing on how to manage work and homeschool and parenting full time. We're supposed to do both at the same time. Jess, I'm going to respond to that right now and say that there is no easy way. And if you want an expert to give you an answer, I think that they're kind of just making it up. I just don't think that there's an easy way to do it. Gail says, students from MacRob created letters from ISO for aged care residents. Students handwrote letters. There's lots of ideas. And don't forget your parent clubs and associations. Some made face masks for all the school staff, students and families that needed them. Kids in our street, says Jen, cook for each other. We can do stuff even in the middle of a pandemic that allows us to build a sense of community and that allows people to feel heard. I would love for you to keep on sharing your ideas about how people are helping. Some of our neighborhood kids, says Kiralee, made balloon animals for everybody walking by their house. Claire says we have a community library that we leave things in for people to take, like bath salts and that kind of thing. All right, so Evelyn has just sent me a message and said that I need to tell you about a book that I've got called How the Heck. So this is to help a little bit with Jess's question about dealing with everything. Like I said, there are no easy answers, but I have got an ebook. It's free. It's called How the Heck. I can't even remember where you're supposed to find it. I think it's on my webpage. Evelyn, can you jump into the chat and tell me, please, where people can find it, because I can't keep up with everything that's going on. The chat's going bananas. But the How the Heck ebook will give you a whole lot of information. Evelyn has said, check out this free How the Heck ebook to help you through the pandemic. And it's in the chat on Zoom, and Evelyn will also put it in the chat on Facebook. Okay, so we're nearly out of time. In fact, we are out of time, and there's still a couple of other things that I want to run by you. So I'm going to jump out of the chat for a sec so I can just wrap this up. First of all, I hope this has been helpful. I hope that as a result of this, that you feel like you can hear your kids and stay calm and level and keep your emotions where they need to be so that you can do that. Secondly, I hope that you can find some opportunities to joke and goof off and have fun and laugh. And third, I hope that you can find a way for you and your family to help other people. I want to share this story with you that it's been one of the stories that I've shared thousands of times in my parent seminars all around the country with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of parents. But I think that it really applies tonight. In fact, we're going to wrap up with two stories, this one, and then my last idea for your family, and then one final story. So now this is I don't know if it's a true story or not, it's a sort of a folklore kind of story, but it teaches a really great principle. Back in the early days of Australia, when the gold rush was on, people were leaving the capital cities and heading to places like Ballarat and Bendigo because they wanted to strike it rich. They wanted to pan for gold. They wanted to find this buried treasure that was running through the rivers and streams. And one young man decided that he was going to participate. He said to his family, goodbye, I love you, thanks for your support, but I'm off. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to strike it rich. I'm going to become wealthy. And so he went out to Ballarat and he sat down, found himself a spot by the river, picked up his pan, and he started panning for gold day after day after day. And as he panned, he'd reach into the pan and pull out a stone that looked like it could be one of those nuggets. But what he found every single time was that it was not a nugget at all. It was just another stone. And he'd get frustrated. He'd throw the stone beside him, and pretty soon there began to be a pile of stones, and the pile of stones got bigger and bigger and bigger. And he got more and more frustrated and poorer until he was destitute and had nothing left. Sitting by the riverbank with nothing but a huge pile of stones and an empty pan, no money, no shelter, no food. Realizing that he was going to need to go home and ask his parents to take him back because the months and months and months of hard work by the river had not given him anything at all. As he sat there crying to himself about how horrible things were, a wealthy prospector who had made a lot of money out of that same river walked by and kind of kicked at the stones and said, young man, that's quite a pile of stones you got there. And the young fellow just came here looking for gold. There's nothing. I don't know how you got so lucky. I've been here for months. I've used up everything. I've given my all to this river and I've got nothing to show for it. The prospector stopped and thought, this might be a teaching moment. He sort of stepped back, reached over and picked up one of these rocks, bent down, tapped it on the edge of the tin, and the rock kind of crumbled a little bit and split open. The prospector pointed into the rock and said, look at this. Look at all these flecks of gold inside the rock. You're sitting on a mountain of treasure right here. All flecks of gold right through here. There's loads of gold. The young man sort of scoffed. I don't want flecks of gold. I don't want to have to do that. He pointed at the prospector had a big pouch on his belt. He said, I want nuggets of gold like you've got in your pouch. That's what I came for, not flecks. I came here for the nuggets. The prospector paused, then he opened up his pouch, lifted up the top, and invited the young man to peer in, which he did. And he was surprised to see that the pouch was full not of nuggets of gold, but of thousands and thousands of tiny flecks, just like those flecks in the rocks. The prospector then said to the young man, "Young man, it is the steady accumulation of these flecks of gold that has made me rich." I think family life, even during a pandemic, shares a lot in common with that story. We think that we're going to have time together and yeah, it's going to be tough and there's stuff to do, but we're going to have golden nuggets rolling down the river of family life. We're going to have all of these happy moments. We're going to have games nights. We're going to get our hour of exercise every afternoon where we're going to jump on our bikes and ride around the block, and the kids are miserable. They won't get off their screens. They won't do their schoolwork. We're having all of these dramas and hassles and issues and hiccups, and it just drives us up the wall. What we essentially find is that it's pretty darn hard work, and it's rocky, and it's muddy, and it's messy, and it's wet, and we get sunburned. I mean, this is all metaphorical for the hard work that it is to look after our family. And we kind of whinge and whine and say, this is hard and I don't like it and I wish everything was normal and I wish I had my money. And I get it. We all wish that. We all wish things were normal. We all wish for a smooth road and an easy life. But just like with the young man, while we sometimes feel like we're sitting on a pile of rocks, inside that pile of rocks are flecks of gold, thousands and thousands of flecks of gold. And if we look carefully, every single day, even in a pandemic, with government restrictions demanding isolation and all kinds of challenges, that pile of rocks is full of flecks of gold. And if we look carefully, we will find all of them and they will make us rich. So I guess before I share my final idea for you, I just want to emphasize that there are flecks of gold in every single day, even if you're living in a 2-bedroom apartment with 17 of you and you've got no yard and no balcony. And I know that's not very many of you. Most of you have got yards and most of you have got opportunities, and there are flecks of gold for us to find. So before I share my last idea, if you want more info, I won't spend more than 30 seconds on this, but if you want more info, I have a Facebook page. It's called Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families. Loads of free information to help to lighten the load. I have a podcast. It's called Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families. Loads of free information to help lighten the load. And I would love for you to just visit there and spend some time there for no other reason than that I want to help. I also have a membership that people pay a monthly fee for, kind of like Netflix, but for parenting. And I'm not going to try and sell that to you. I just want you to know that it's there, because if you're looking for more support, there's additional support that I can offer. And that's where you get the information, happyfamilies.com.au. Now, the last thing that I want to share with you is this, and it ties in with my story. And that is that our kids need to have hope. I'm watching the comments that are coming through, and so many of you are saying it's so hard and the kids are struggling and it's bad for their mental health. And you're right. You're absolutely right. But when our children feel heard, and when our children enjoy laughter and humor, and when our children are giving to others and helping, they start to have hope that life is kind of normal-ish and that it will go back to normal. And our job as parents, more than anything, especially during the hard times, is to be hope builders. Our job is to build hope in our kids. And let me tell you how you can do that. First of all, you can look for the gold flecks. You can let them know that life is okay and it can even be better. And perhaps you might spend some time talking about what is going well. Maybe you can talk to them about how lockdown will finish in a few weeks. We don't know exactly when, and that's a bit tricky. It's really frustrating, and we wish it was in a few minutes rather than a few weeks, but it will finish. And when it does, where do you want to go first? Who should we have over for dinner first? Who are we going to go and visit first? Give them hope. Give them something to look forward to. Talk to them about the birthday parties that they've missed and how you're going to have a birthday party as soon as the government allows it, so that they can invite their friends over, or you can go to the park and you can do that stuff. Because that will return. It will happen one day. We don't know when. I know that's frustrating and we can't give them an answer, but we can start to build that hope and help them to know that it's going to be okay and we can head in that direction. So I just want to emphasize that. And perhaps, like I said, one last story to wrap things up. This is a story that's told by an American author, by Robert Fulghum. He says he was in Europe attending a lecture that was being conducted by a philosopher by the name of Dr. Papaderos. This philosopher, as he wrapped up his lecture, said to everybody, well, it's almost time for us to finish. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap this up? And nobody really said anything. And so people started putting things away. You know what it's like. You're about to finish and everyone wants to get out the door really quick. But then something happened. Robert Fulgham put up his hand and said, Dr. Papaderos, it might be a hard question, but I'm wondering what you think the meaning of life is. Which is kind of a big question to ask at the end of a lecture, right? I mean, who wants to talk about the meaning of life when the lecture is over? But Dr. Papaderos took it seriously, even though everyone laughed, and said, I'd like to answer that. He pulled a little mirror that had been rounded at the edges out of his wallet and held it up, just like this. And he said, when I was a boy, I grew up in World War II, and near our home, where there were ruins and all sorts of things happened, he said there was a Nazi motorcycle crashed just near us. And I went and picked up all of the broken fragments of the mirror. I was going to try and put the mirror back together, but I couldn't. And so what I did instead was I just held onto one of those fragments, and over the ensuing days and weeks and months, I just used a stone and I scraped the edges of the mirror until I turned it into this circle that you can see now. And then I started playing a little game. What I would do with the mirror is I would angle it against the rays of light coming from the sun, and I would shine the sun into whatever places I could where the sun wasn't getting. And it became a game to see the darkest places or the furthest, deepest places that I could get the light to go from the sun. He said, I kept on playing the game through my boyhood and into my teenage years. And it wasn't until I was a young adult, still playing the game from time to time and carrying the little mirror, that I realized that there was something wonderful in a metaphor related to this game I was playing. He said, there is light all around us. And our job as people, the purpose of my life, is to act like that mirror and to reflect that light into dark places. As parents right now, some of you are in a dark place. And as parents right now, some of your children are also in dark places. The challenge for all of us, even on a cold, windy, wet, rainy, stormy, dark, miserable Melbourne day, the challenge for each of us is to find a ray of light and shine it into dark places, to be that ray of light for our families, to be leaders, to be inspiring, and to give our children hope, because that's what they need. Well, I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. That is everything that I had prepared for you. I hope that you've enjoyed that. It's been a real pleasure and a privilege to be able to share this with you. There have been so many questions come through, many of them to do with screens. And I wish that I had time to answer all of those questions. I am just going to respond to the screen question only. There have been a lot of others that have come through that we just don't have time to answer. And I need to be respectful of the fact that I told you I'd keep you here for 40 minutes and I'm already at 53. So I'm just going to answer really quickly to be as helpful as I can. If you are dealing with screen issues, what I'm going to suggest that you do is jump onto my podcast. And in fact, I'm going to find the episode number for you right now so that I can tell you exactly where it is. It's Justin Coulson's Happy Families podcast. And you find it on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts. And I did a podcast about what I call the 3 E's of effective discipline. The 3 E's of effective discipline are called explore, explain, and empower. And essentially what we're doing with those 3 E's is we're spending some time trying to understand where our kids are coming from, why they're so compelled to be on their screens. We're explaining what our expectations are, and then we're empowering them to come up with really great ideas about how they can moderate their screens well. Episode number 80 of the podcast is called Tech Addicted Teens. That's one helpful place to start. In addition, episode number 78 is called Boundaries and the 3 E's. So I think that those 2 places are going to be the most helpful places that you can go. Episode 78 and episode 80 of the Dr. Justin Coulson's Happy Families podcast. But I do just want to say one last very quick thing about this before I wrap it up. And that is, your screens are your kids' only real connection right now. So stop stressing out overly about how much screen time they're getting. Instead, make sure that they're getting a whole and balanced childhood. Kids use screens for 3 primary things: connection, creation, and consumption. While they're connecting and creating, relax. It's okay. While they're consuming, you might want to ask them if they can minimize their consumption. Okay, but connection and creation is good for them, especially right now in the middle of a global pandemic. That's good for them. The other thing that I would say is this: don't worry so much about screen time. A fellow that I think is just brilliant, his name is Andrew Shabalsky. He's at Oxford, and he raises this point. He says, we don't talk to people about how much food time they've had today. We ask them what they ate. And it should be the same with our screens. Don't talk about how much screen time you had. Ask them what they've consumed on their screens versus what they've created and connected with. That's the key thing. Now, if they're if they're getting some physical activity, if they're doing their schoolwork, if they're connecting with people, if they're doing their music practice or whatever the other stuff is that you've got to do as a family, if they're doing all of that, don't worry too much about the screens. You'll be able to deal with screens and minimizing their exposure to screens again once the isolation is gone. And you know what? It's probably going to help you to relax a little bit as well and give you a bit of space. Alrighty, so that's all we've got time for tonight. I hope that you've enjoyed this. I hope that it's been helpful. I hope that it's given you some hope and helped you realize that you're not the only one. Like I said, if you'd like more info, visit happyfamilies.com.au. And hopefully I'll be able to see you on the Facebook page or in the podcast or wherever it might be. Thanks once again, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now. I'm going to stop the webinar. Go and hug your kids. Let them know that you love them. And hopefully we'll be able to do something again for you in the near future. Hopefully it won't be necessary, but if it is, hopefully we can help some more. Toodaloo.